Okay, welcome to the weightlift exercise. And like I mentioned before, we're starting directly in our blend file. And I downloaded my SyncSketch sketches in video format, and I've gone as far as actually animating this first section of just May looking around and pushing aside these little bottles and then getting ready for the weight lift. And as always, the reason why I did that is because that section is not really part of the exercise. So I wanted to save you some time so you're not watching everything. But if you want to analyze it, you can still do that in this blend file that we'll give you. And together, we're going to be focusing on this middle part, which when you look at a reference, is picking up the pumpkin, getting it up, and getting it down, doing the overshoot, and this settle. And I think we're gonna go up to here just because the last part is just acting, just him wiping his brow and settling into the final pose. So I'll just be speeding through that when I'm posing it. And I'm being a little more sparse with my markers this time because in the jump exercise I had so many markers here and I felt like it might be a little bit confusing. So I just marked the main poses and we can go quickly through that. So we're gonna be starting around here. And the pose looks slightly different from what we have here just because we're stitching two different references together, but that's fine. So May is gonna be getting ready to pick up the pumpkin. She's looking down, and then here this is the contact where she actually grabs the pumpkin, and that's where our constraint is gonna start as well. Then I'm gonna do a pose here. It's kind of like a breakdown on the way up. Here, this is where the arms are very vertical. There's a lot of struggle in the face, and the legs are making room for the pumpkin in the middle, which is gonna be interesting because this is a much different size compared to the medicine ball. So we'll see what we can do there. And here we have the pose where the foot is leaving the ground. So I wanna know where that is before he takes a step. And here we have another key. The body is collapsing a little bit, so the pelvis is going down. And he's fully holding the medicine ball and supporting it with his body. We have this reverse S-curve, and this foot is going up. And then here is a pose where I didn't have a drawing, but this is basically the last pose before he starts pushing the medicine ball away from his body. And the body is already rotated in that direction of movement. So I felt like this was almost like a moving hold for the previous pose that I wanted to have there. And here is another key pose. Let me just hide May so we can see better. So this is where the pumpkin will hit the table. And again, this pose will look different because our tabletop is higher than our platform in the reference here. So the pose is not gonna look exactly like that, but that's totally fine. We actually have to learn how to extract stuff from our reference and make it work for our animation. So that's something we're gonna have to figure out and create a nice appealing pose. Then we have kind of a settle where his weight is finally on his legs and the arms are still touching the medicine ball. And then here I marked the contact pose on the foot. And this is kind of a key pose as well. And let's just say this will be our last pose for the weight lift. But then after that, I will have a few more poses. This is a key pose of wiping the brow. And this is kind of a breakdown on the way down. This is the flick. And then just a bit of a settle with an exhale. So essentially, these are the poses I want to focus on first, but of course I'll be going back and filling in everything else. And we might bring this video back for that, or we might just do it using the clean version and just grab and see what information we need. So we'll cross that bridge when we get there. But yeah, this exercise will be a bit of a tricky one because of those constraints and also those inconsistencies. First of all, the size of the pumpkin is a lot bigger than the medicine ball, and the table is also a lot higher than in our reference. So that's gonna be a bit of an interesting challenge. And of course the constraints and everything else. So this first part I already animated, like I said, and I already splined it. There's still a bunch of stuff that I'll probably go back to later and fix, but for now that's looking good. Let me play that for you. So she looks around, leans, pushes those bottles, and gets ready to pick up the pumpkin. And let me just move the marker here because this is where I have my last key so far. I keyed this and I changed it to constant so that now when we start doing the blocking, it will all be in stepped mode. And it's pretty much the same thing as when we did the weight shift animation when Max was looking down on his phone, then looked forward ahead of him, and then looked down, and then took a step. And then we'll just have this push animation based on the reference. Okay, so let me actually get the pumpkin into pose mode with May so I can work on them together. And so let me go to 130 first and key that, and I'm gonna change my reference to the clean version quickly. Okay, so let's do the posing here first. For now, I don't need this platform yet, and it's cutting into my reference, so I'm just gonna hide the quarters, and I have this floor here instead, so now I can see my reference better. So I need to bring May down, and I have the arms in IK in global space, so they're not gonna go with her. Let's say maybe here, and try to create that C curve on the body with those straight arms touching the pumpkin. I'm also gonna use these shoulders to gain extra length on the arms, because as you can see, they're not long enough to reach all the way down. Okay, so I do have a pose where May is touching the pumpkin, but you can see that if I left it like this, it just looks very unappealing. The body parts are overlapping each other a lot, so the head is exactly in front of the chest and the chest is exactly in front of the hips, and I don't think this looks very good. So what I'm gonna try and do is play around with this pose and try to make it look more like what I have in the reference. I don't know how far I'll be able to get because there's always rig limitations, but I'm sure I can get something better looking than this. I'm just gonna go to the frame next to it just so I don't lose what I already had in case it goes horribly wrong. And then I can always paste the new pose into frame 130. Here I'm also trying to use this pivot controller on the foot so I can give myself more space for the body. But I have to change that through here as well. So I can delete everything that came before and paste that here so that when the foot is supposed to be planted, it's not shifting around. Okay, let's compare the two poses. So I feel like the new pose definitely makes more sense, but it feels a little off balance. I think this might be better. And I also noticed that Brian is starting to look at the table, or he is trying to look in the direction where he's gonna travel. So I'm trying to do that here as well, but I'm not sure if that's working or not, or if I should just have her looking at the pumpkin. Maybe I'll have something in between. And now I do have some space between the arm and the leg. I might close it up a little just so I have that room to go when the legs start opening through here. But I am leaving a little bit of space there just for the silhouette purposes. Okay, so I brought that pose onto frame 130 where it belongs, getting rid of the other pose. And now before moving on to pose on 143, I'm actually gonna do 163 first. And the reason for that is that 143 is more of a breakdown. And when I have 163, I'll be able to compare the previous pose and the next pose and then see where this in-between breakdown should be. So key everything. And like we've done before, I'm actually gonna zero out this spine because I don't wanna have any weird stuff happening on it. Just all the rotations and translations are gonna be zeroed out, and we're gonna work from there. And in order to create this pose, I actually need that constraint now. So let's just go back quickly to 130 and constrain the pumpkin to the hand, and then constrain the other hand to the pumpkin. So I'm gonna grab the hand pivot controller, and now I'm gonna grab the mid controller on the pumpkin, and I'm just gonna go to my dynamic parent and click create. And so that gives me two keys. It gives me the key where the constraint is active, and on the previous key it's not active. And this is just an automated system for what you have to do anyways, because constraints should turn on and off over one frame. You shouldn't have any animation in between. So that makes it super easy. And now when I move the hand, the pumpkin is following. And for the other hand, I'm just gonna grab the mid on the pumpkin and then the hand because I want the pumpkin to be the parent. And again, click create. And so now when I move this hand, it drives the pumpkin and the pumpkin drives the right hand. Okay, so now that my constraint is on, I can go back to frame 163 and now I can start posing the arms. And I don't want to have too much overlap with the body, but if there's a little bit, that's okay because we can't really see it from this angle. We just don't want it to be like deep in the body because then you can tell. And now I really want to exaggerate that grip, so I'm changing the fingers a little. Now I'm trying to see if the shoulders should be up or down, because in our reference it's kind of hard to see. I know there's tension in them, but they feel more just firm and straight. But I think that for my animation I actually want to bring them up and make it feel like she's really trying to hold that pumpkin up. And I'll bring the hands higher so I can still have that elbow angle. Let me really push that S-curve on the body. Okay, and we really want to have that weight of the body over those toes. And now the big thing we still have to work on is this expression. So we really want to show struggle. And I'm not sure if I want to do it by using the puff on the cheeks or if I just want to have like clenched teeth. But I'm gonna play around and see what's working. I know Brian has his eyes open, but I think I definitely want to have them closed really tight for a moment there. And I really want to have that tension on the eyebrows too. Okay, so here's a rough pose for the puffer, but I feel like it's not looking that appealing. So I think I'm gonna go in a different direction and just create my own struggle pose that isn't really super based on the reference, but looks good on me. Okay, so for now, I think I'm gonna keep this pose, and later I might come in and change it some more. But right now, I don't want to spend too much time on it. But some things that I did is change the direction of the eyes, so they have a reverse U shape now. And I pushed the brows more down, and then I changed the mouth. Okay, and now that I have this pose on 163 and the previous pose on 130, I'm ready to tackle pose on 143. So first, I'm just using the breakdowner tool to make it easier and bring May higher to a pose that's kind of similar to what I'm looking at in my reference. In terms of the face, I think I want the expression to already be close to the final expression. Except, I think I want the mouth to be closed. So what I think I'm gonna do to make it easier is just actually zero out the mouth first fully and just work from there, just so I don't have any of those mini rotations and translations that make it harder to pose the mouth. Sometimes it's just easier to completely zero something out and start again. Okay, so in terms of the face, that's fine for now. Now let's start flipping a little bit between the previous pose and this pose and the next one. So the legs have definitely made room. At this point, And we want to have some of that drag on the chest. So the chest is going to be more slouched, but the neck is going up. And the head is starting to look up a lot. And we definitely want to drag those shoulders a lot. And that gives us more leeway to drag the arms more because we want to have them as straight as possible. So the cog is shooting forward, but it's not going much higher. It's still kind of low. So again, that gives us more leeway with the arms. And we should really tuck those arms in. So first of all, we want the pumpkin to look vertical like this. And let's bring the arms closer to the body. Okay, let's leave this pose for now. I think it's looking fine. Now let's go to frame 172. And so the arms are in their top position. This is the highest they'll go. And we've shifted the weight on the foot that's closer to us. He has taken a step. The other heel is higher off the ground. And the S-curve is even stronger now. And he is rotating towards that bench. At this point, I'm actually gonna turn on the quarters because I want to see where the table is located. I don't want to accidentally go through the table. I'm actually noticing that my table is quite far behind May. So something I might want to do is that I'm gonna grab the God Note of May and the pumpkin as well as the two cans, and in global space I'm gonna bring them back. And I think I'm also gonna move everything this way so that with the big size of the pumpkin I have more room away from the table, and just slightly rotate it towards the table to match my reference better. And I'm using Animate, by the way, because it's the easiest way to rotate everything without having to delete all the other keys. And so I definitely have to make some changes to the animation. I also have to redo my constraint now because it has broken a little bit. So first things first, I'm gonna grab these hands, and then on all of this animation here that I did before, I'm just gonna shift them to be in the correct place.
One eternity later.
Okay, so I did a very rough fix on those arms. I'm gonna be fixing them more later, but that's not really important right now. I'm just gonna fix this constraint next. And basically what you can do is just delete the old constraint. So even though we used an add-on to create a constraint, the way the add-ons work is that they're connected to Blender's native interface. So they'll show up here. And then you can just press the X and everything will pop back into position. But now, of course, the arms have been moved because of the changes we made globally. So I'm just gonna shift them back. And it feels like I need to move the cog as well. And so now we can redo the constraint with everything looking correct again. So I'm grabbing the hand and the pumpkin and going to dynamic parent, create. Now the hand is driving the pumpkin, and then grabbing the other hand and the pumpkin, create. And so now again the hand is driving everything. And now we can adjust the rest of the posing if we need to. We have some weird offset happening on that hand here. I'm not sure why. I'll just bring it back. Okay, so now everything is looking better. we have more wiggle room to get May to that table. So she's going to take a step. And whole body is gonna be rotated towards the table. And at this point, May should definitely be looking, so I'm gonna open her eyes. I'm gonna bring these cheeks lower, at least on this side, so she can see better. And because I'm opening the eyes, I'm also gonna relax the eyebrows a little. So you can see we're definitely starting to deviate from the reference, but we're still extracting what we need. Like for example, that S-curve, the struggle, the arms being up high, and the feet being raised on the heel. And also she's rotating towards the table now. So if we flip through it, this is our first pose. She's going down to grab the pumpkin, struggling to pick it up. Now she's pretty much in the top position and taking a step towards that table. So next pose is on frame 179, so I'll key everything. And when we flip, this is that kind of a moving hold, but not really. So Brian continues moving forward. The medicine ball is even higher in his hands, and he's really pushing with that pelvis and twisting forward. And then there's a little bit of struggle in those feet, so that heel was up off the ground and now it's on the ground. And the face is very pushed again. Okay, so let's start with that twist first. Okay, so I'm not following the reference 100% because he twists more than May does, but I don't need to twist her as much at this point. And I am bringing her higher, her whole pelvis area, and we'll see once we spline if that's looking good or not, but I feel like she really needs to go higher here so that for the next pose she can slam it down. Otherwise, the pumpkin would be pretty much at the level of the table and she would just have to put it down. So we'll see how that goes. And I pushed her shoulders higher, I pushed the expression more so that it looks like she's struggling a lot. The previous expression we might need to change a little bit to get a better contrast between the two later, but for now I'm not gonna worry about that. And I also use this pivot to adjust the position of the hand a little bit. And I was able to do that because actually when I changed the constraint, I end up constraining the pumpkin to the actual IK controller instead of this pivot. which lets me move the hand independently of the pumpkin. So that's something I did when I was redoing the constraint. You can do either one and just adjust the position afterwards, because with Blender, even though you have something constrained, you're still able to change its position and animate it, unlike in Maya. So either way is fine. But I just didn't want that wrist to be super broken. Right now it has an angle there, but it feels more natural. You can do that with your hand. And before it was too much, where I didn't like how broken it looked. So this is the two poses when flipping between them. And I think we're ready for the pose on 193 now. So here is where the pumpkin finally touches the table. The whole weight is forward, he's on his tippy toes, and the hands are pushing down on the pumpkin, trying to stop himself from going forward. I'm actually gonna move my reference a little bit so I can see his face. So this doesn't animate, you can just change it whenever you need to. Oh, I think you can animate it actually if you insert keyframes, but I don't need to do that. I'm just moving it where it's best for me to see everything. But I don't want those changes to be keyed and the reference floating around. Okay, now back to pose mode. And the line of action is very different now. So we had the reverse S curve here, and now it's gonna be leaning forward. So there's almost like a C curve going through the body. So I think I'm gonna start with placing the pumpkin on the ground and then try to adjust the body to make it work with that, and also adjust the pumpkin if I need it. But this gives me a frame of reference of how I should pose May around the pumpkin. And you can see that the hands look very broken at this point. So I'm definitely going to be changing that position. And that hopefully that shift is going to be hidden by this fast movement here. So at some point here through that fast movement, I'm going to change it so it looks more natural. And now she's gonna have an expression where her eyes are more wider open, and there is that kind of relief, or almost like a shocked expression before the relief because of the impact that happened just now. So now I have the two poses, but if you look at just the pelvis area, it doesn't look like she's moving forward much. So what I'm gonna do is grab the hand and grab the cog, and in global space, I'm gonna push them forward. Just enough so it doesn't go through these bottles here. It's okay if it overlaps in the camera view. So now you can see that feels a lot more believable. I also need to make sure that the pumpkin actually looks like it's sitting on the ground, and you can see there's a little bit of an angle here. So this looks more solid now. Okay, and now it looks like we have that nice bounce up and down. We'll see how it looks in spline, but let's move on to 208 now. So Brian is now steady on his feet and he's pushing off the pumpkin to get up. And so he's definitely more upright and also turned towards us more. And the face continues getting a little bit more neutral. I also didn't change this hand before, but it's very broken. I'm just gonna bring that lower and paste it onto the previous pose too. So again, the change will happen through that fast motion here when he's hitting the table. So hopefully we won't see it, and then it looks better now. So that when May stops holding the pumpkin, the hands will be in a more natural position. And I'm also noticing that the shoulders are pretty high here on Brian, and I brought mine down. So I think I'll just bring them back up. Okay, and we have these two markers, 217 and 230, but they're kind of similar, and he's already let go of the pumpkin before this marker on 217. So what I'm thinking is I'll just do the 229 one, and then we're gonna fill it in after. And this is gonna be our last pose for this exercise, and then I'm just gonna fill in the rest of the acting later. So here he takes a step back. He's pretty much upright at this point. The arms still have tension in them and they're close to the pumpkin. They're very straight. He's just making sure that it's not gonna go anywhere. And so here we want to disable the constraints. So this hand is connected to the pumpkin. I'm just gonna go to dynamic parent and click disable. So again, it gives me two keys, one with the constraint off and one with it on. You can see it here. And so now I'm able to move that hand and it's not actually affected anymore by the pumpkin. And for the other hand, because it's the hand driving the pumpkin, I'm gonna turn it off on the pumpkin. So now we're able to just grab it and work with that hand. And it's a little awkward looking now because we have that pivot working against the hand controller, but I'm hoping it's gonna be fine for the rest of the animation. Worst case, what I can do over one frame is match it. So as soon as I turn off the constraint, which will be probably around frame 111 later, I can also zero out that pivot point and I can just match the position of the hand and go from there. Alright, and then let's fill in that pose onto 17. So he has taken the step, but his heel is still off the ground. The hands have left the pumpkin. They're already in that 10-step pose, but they're closer to it than on the next pose. And his body is still pretty tense. The shoulders are high up, but he's starting to straighten out. And also when you flip through these three, you can see that the cog is higher and then it drops down. And of course, the weight is on the far leg because the other one is moving. So that's also going to affect the tilt of the pelvis. So what you can do for these constraints now, you can just grab those two keys created here and just bring it over. Now this way, the pumpkin isn't constrained anymore to the hand. And then for the other one, that's a little trickier because we can't just paste it since the hand is moving. It's not just stuck in place like the pumpkin. So you can just grab it, click on disable, and then you can just delete this key here. That was our previous key for turning off the constraint. You can see the influence was 1. On the next key, it was 0. So on 228, I'll just delete it, and now it's on 0. So the last frame now where we have the constraint is frame 216, and then 17 is off. Now I can move it without the pumpkin affecting it. Okay, so now she's letting go, and then here she fully lets go of the pumpkin. And then here at the beginning we have a pose that we haven't really addressed. So basically I had this animation from before, and then we have this other key where she's already touching the pumpkin. Let's go to somewhere around here on 123. That's where I'm gonna add the key. And I'm gonna delete the previous one because I already had a key on here, which was my last frame of that animation. So I don't want to have it keyed twice because then May will just stay frozen for that moment. So his back is already very curved, the arms are hanging down, but there isn't as much tension, and the fingers are opening to grab that pumpkin. The pelvis is on the way down, but it's closer to the up position than it is to the down position. And the head is looking down. You can see on the next pose, it's kind of tilted up a little, but here it's fully looking down. I also want to make it look like this hand is delayed, so it's gonna be slightly higher than the other hand. And I want to make this hair look like it's hanging. Okay, and let's just play the whole thing to see what we have so far. And out of curiosity, I know it's not gonna look good, but I'm gonna change it to Bezier curve as well, just to catch any weirdness, because now that we have constraints, it's so much easier for something to start flipping or getting messed up. And it would be much easier if we catch it now rather than later when we have more keys to work with. Okay, there's a little bit of flipping here on the pumpkin, but that's such a minor thing, we can easily fix it later. And the only thing that's really looking a little silly right now is this part with the pumpkin hitting the table. That's looking very soft, but that's just because we don't have enough breakdowns there yet. Other than that, I think it's looking pretty good. You can already start seeing the weight and the struggle. So we are ready to change it back to constant and work on more breakdowns in between, because you already know from previous exercises that this is not enough keys to go into spline at all. You should have a key on maybe every fourth frame. It depends on the information you need to input, but we definitely can't go with just 13 empty frames and here it's 20 empty frames and so on. So we definitely need a few more keys in between these.